Ethics Podcast. I'm Matthew Westfox, one of our hosts. Joining me on the line is Paul. Paul, how you doing today?
Not so bad. I'll be doing even better if I can find this dog and collect my $300 reward.
So we were joking before, Paul, you have become a pet bounty hunter. Is that what's going on?
That is correct. I have relocated to Las Vegas temporarily, and I have been retained to find a dog named Lucy,
okay,
who is lost in this area. So I may immediately have to go at some point.
Sounds
if
good.
I find a small brown dog.
We will both hope for your good luck and hope for your attention and hope for continued success. So today we're talking about a topic that I know a lot of folks have been discussing on social media in various forms, and it's a topic that has a lot of its roots in social media, in superhero stories, and we're certainly going to be referencing superhero stories. But I want to kind of say from the outset, this is a little different than some of our other episodes, because this week we're really talking about more of just an ethical issue in our world today. We're talking about punching Nazis, and is it okay to punch a Nazi? Which, I mean, when I think about that, the first thing I always think about is Captain America and the iconic pictures of him punching Hitler. But also there's an extent to which almost all the superhero stories that we talk about are, to some degree, vigilante stories. And when we're talking about punching Nazis, to some extent we're talking about an act of vigilantism. So I think it's a topical idea, and certainly it's one that's connected. And I'm sure we're going to be bringing up a lot of stuff from superhero stuff as we go. So, but let me just start here, Paul, with a simple question. Is it okay to punch a Nazi?
I mean, sure, have at it, I mean, I think that, there's obviously some nuance that we'll get into, and, I'd mostly say, like, why are you punching a Nazi,
Yeah.
And I guess we'll get into, like, what do you mean by a Nazi?
Yep.
I mean, did you just watch, Raiders of the Lost Ark? You're like, ooh, punching Nazis looks fun, or are you... Yeah.
I got to say, just as an aside, but I was thinking about this going into this podcast. Like, I love the Indiana Jones movies, but one reason I think that there's a lot of reasons why the Crystal Skull is just nowhere near as good as those first three Indiana Jones movies. But one reason is I think, like, Indiana Jones punching Nazis just feels great. Indiana Jones punching Russian communists, it's just not as satisfying. They just like the bad guys of the first three Indiana Jones movies are Nazis and crazy cult members who want to enslave little children and pull their hearts out of their bodies.
Yeah.
And then we get Russians, and it's just like, I'm just not as worked up watching him punch Russians.
Yeah. Although lately...
Okay, well, yes, that's also true. But anyway, that's an aside. But yeah, well,
yeah.
I want to kind of make clear also as we're going forward, first of all, this podcast is not trying to tell you what to do. Please, nobody sue us if anyone listens to this podcast and goes out and punches Nazis. We're not telling you to do it.
It would be great for ratings.
Well, okay, that's also true. We can podcast in jail. Let's see what happens.
By the way, this whole thing was Matthew's idea, the whole, so I'd like to give him all the credit for superhero ethics.
Thank you for that. I appreciate all of that, my friend. Remember, the police have come to your house already, not mine. So.
Yeah, I know. So you're up next.
Okay.
But
the point being here, I think I want to make clear, it's not that this is about encouraging folks whatever to do, but it's that, and Paul, I want to hear your thoughts on this. For me, I have read lots of great memes about, why it's fun, that video of someone punching Richard Spencer and how great that was from the perspective. And I've heard a lot of people say that they want to punch Nazis, but I haven't heard many people talk about why. And why they feel like it's okay, and why, especially from, people who would often be pretty anti-violence.
Right.
And I'm certainly someone who feels like why you do, I think you were just saying this before as well, why you do things is really important, and knowing why you do things. And for myself, at least, I do think it's okay to punch a Nazi, and I think that really goes against a lot of the other things I believe. And so I really want to explore why that is, and talk about why that is, and talk about why it wouldn't be. Because I think there's something kind of dangerous about just saying, you know what, it feels good to punch a Nazi, so let's do what feels good.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Although, I'll get into punching people in the face later. but so I'll get into it now. I like to punch people in the face. Not like it's a thing I've done a lot in my life, but there is something very satisfying about hitting people. Now, I'll say that with, throughout my life, I've never hit a person in anger, and I can really only think of one time that I hit a person that wasn't, that it wasn't like in a Taekwondo class. And it's like, yeah, we're going to hit each other,
Right, yeah.
And where if they hit me in the head, I'm like, oh, good shot,
When you're talking about punching people, you're talking about doing it primarily in a Taekwondo setting where there's a level of consent of like, we are agreeing to try to punch each other.
Exactly. So that's a big caveat, obviously. But I will just say that I have found it physically and emotionally satisfying.
Yeah.
And that's a thing that I think is, that one needs to be careful about, thinking, like when doing something that's causing harm to someone else, like is enjoyable, that, you can like look deep or whatever into yourself, but you can also just think like, okay, maybe I'll not do this for that reason, and then I just want to mention the one time that it wasn't in like a Taekwondo class or whatever was, our good friend Adam, who did a guest episode.
Yes.
When, I think I need to quickly tell the sunburn story.
Go right ahead.
Okay. So, Matthew was hosting a poker game at his house, and Adam Hulst and I were there, right? And, we're all playing, and I had this terrible sunburn that I'd been sitting out in Central Park playing guitar all day, and it just got my forearms completely sunburned. And so he's like acting like he's about to touch my sunburn. I'm like, dude, don't touch my sunburn. And he's like, I'm going to touch your sunburn. I'm like, don't touch my sunburn. And then he keeps doing it. I'm like, look, if you touch my sunburn, I'm going to punch you in the face. and I said it 2 or 3 times. And then finally he touched my sunburn and I punched him in the face. But fortunately that was before I was all that good at punching. So, everyone lives happily ever after. We're still friends. He's hit me in the head in Taekwondo class. We're all good. But, I do think there are times when violence is called for, and I think those are generally times when somebody else is advocating or threatening violence in a way that, whether you think it's okay to punch someone in the face because they're touching your sunburn or not, I think that is an act of physical aggression. It's like someone's like, don't touch me, and then you touch them, particularly if you know it's going to cause physical pain. It's like, that seems like, to me, that's a time when it's like I don't feel bad, if I'd really hurt him and injured him, I would feel bad.
Yeah,
but
of course.
I do feel like if it's like, if you're like, no, don't touch me, and then someone touches you and you hit them, it's like, yeah, okay. Like, they shouldn't touch you. Like, you told them not to touch you. They don't have a right to do that. And obviously there's other circumstances that are much, more important in that regard,
Well, and I think
people not wanting to be touched.
There's 2 key points there that you're saying that I think are super important. One of which is just, and we're going to get more into this when we talk about why we're okay with it in this moment. The idea of self-defense. Like, I think that I took some fantastic courses on Martin Luther King and his legacy when I was in seminary. And one of the things that really stuck with me was some of the stuff that I learned about, like, the differences between, nonviolence and pacifism. And that one of the things that was often talked about was that, even King, even someone like Martin Luther King, who we think, like, he was definitely advocating nonviolence as a way of protest, as a very important thing, but he was also not a pacifist. He was also like, part of what he wanted was for the United States government to send men with guns to force people to, like, allow, children to go to schools in certain places or things like that. Like, it was just violence in a particularly state-sanctioned way that he was encouraging.
And specifically the federal state versus the violence of the state.
Exactly. But that's so much of essential to that message was the idea of, like, violence was being done already. And that, then you look at someone like Malcolm X's writings and words at that time, that it was very much about the importance of being able to use violence as a means of self-defense. And I think that's something we'll talk about definitely because, certainly all the superhero stories, it's about, right? I mean, I love like the end of Doctor Strange when he finds a non-violent way to deal with it, but that's a pretty rare thing. I mean, clearly violence is a big part of these stories.
Yeah, and he's still using force, by the way. He's not using
Oh yeah, that's true.
violence necessarily, but he's trapping somebody or this whatever, Dormammu, whatever the name, I don't know, in this time loop. I mean, that's
No,
like
that's a good point.
that.
Yeah, that is a physical. It is a kind of force. But the other thing that I want to just touch on quickly before we get into some of the deeper questions that I think you mentioned that's so important is what you said about that it felt good to punch someone. And I think that's like, I'm not saying like, hey, here's a great way to feel better about yourself. Go punch someone.
Right. No.
I'm saying I think that there's a danger there because I think in a way I see it actually a little bit similar to some of the stuff I see on the internet where like, yeah, when someone says something you think is stupid, posting some hilariously biting, cruel remark about how terrible a person they are feels good on some level. Like, and I think a physical punch or a mental, attack, like both of them can be okay. By mental attack, I mean a post, not a psionic attack.
Right.
Given our audience,
my brain to make your, explode. Yeah.
Exactly. No. But the point is, I think it's one of the things that we have to be keeping in mind in these conversations is right now people feel very scared, they feel very frustrated, they feel very alone and under attack, and punching a Nazi and watching someone else punch a Nazi feels really good. And I think that that's a good thing to engage, and I think that some degree of allowing ourselves to have that good feeling is a good thing. But oh my God, is that dangerous to get too much? I think that's one of the things I just want to lay.
It's not a good reason to continue that direction, basically.
Right. Totally. So let's go in a little bit deeper about this. So for you, what makes it okay to punch a Nazi?
Well, I mean, I would say that the merits that I see, the upside. I'm gonna talk about Zack Snyder here for a little bit.
Go for it.
Because I know how big a fan you are. And I'd say we can probably agree that his least terrible movie, in fact, arguably a genuinely good movie, 300.
Yep.
It's kind of about punching Nazis.
Yeah.
Full spoilers for 300 ahead. It's a movie about 300 heavily bearded, chest-waxed Spartans who go to defend Sparta, and I guess like kind of all of Greece, against the Persian army, right? And which is like 100,000 people or something like that.
Uh-huh.
And the Persian army is led by, is he an emperor? Right?
Yeah, it's Xerxes. I think the word
Xerxes, is Xerxes.
Emperor. I mean, it's the king.
But like emperor god that he's like
right.
Who's looked at as like basically like as a god.
Sure.
And at least in this story. And so the whole premise is like, we're going to make him bleed. And so they repel the army, and they all die, of course.
Right.
But they make him bleed, and I think the idea there is that like the symbolism of that is that they're basically showing everyone like, look, he's not a god, he's not untouchable, he's not immortal, he's just a person.
Yep.
And we can make him bleed. And to me, some of the one merit of Nazi punching, if you will, is that I think there is this aura of like, being kind of above like the actual, like whatever's going on in the world, like where when, particularly when we're talking about, not Nazi soldiers, right? It's like, yeah, you can shoot a Nazi soldier because they're trying to shoot other people. It's like, I mean, that's war, right?
Yeah.
And that's a whole different animal. But in terms of like today's neo-Nazis, who call themselves the alt-right or whatever, these are people who are advocating violence, who are advocating, hateful ideas, and then being like, oh well, it's just it's just free speech, which I mean personally I believe in as much as pretty much anybody, free speech, but some speech has consequences, and it's not that I think the law should be like, oh no, you're not allowed to say that, but like when there are consequences, then it should be like, well, you are responsible for those consequences, and also like, you know what, if you're going around saying things like, that are physically endangering other people, like, if someone punches you in the face, like, okay.
Yep.
And that kind of, I think, sort of also humanizes and kind of removes, I know that kind of went off into a totally different sort of tangent, but the main point being like, don't let a Nazi have majesty. Like,
do you want it for those people who don't play Vampire the Masquerade? Do you want to explain that reference?
Yeah, I do. So there's this role playing game, which is like a live action game, and there's a tabletop game, where there's a bunch of vampires running around in the real world, and nobody knows who they are, and blah blah blah. But they have different powers, and one of the powers is presence, which is like the ability to project this aura of power, basically. And the highest level that characters can get without being like ridiculously super powerful is called majesty, where basically other people, humans, vampires, whatever, can't attack that person because they have this aura of like invincibility or whatever. And I think like kind of breaking, not that say Richard Spencer has that specific aura, but I think when somebody goes around just spouting their ideas and being saying these things, sorry I can't find a more eloquent way of putting it after being a little bit sleep deprived after usual. But basically going around holding forth on like who the superior people are. It's like, I think there is merit in being like, no, you're not superior. You're just a person.
Yeah, I definitely, I hear where you're coming from with that, and I would mostly agree. I also think and I love the majesty reference because I think it's very applicable. I think I have a similar, not exactly the same feeling on it, but something kind of similar, which is that part of what I see happening, and I actually would use a role-playing game here also as an example, is there are a number of role-playing games that I know you and I have played, other people I know have played. Like, also in that Vampire the Masquerade world, there was a game called Mage the Ascension. It was all about being magic users, mages in the modern world. And the way the game was written, it was a wonderful world, but the rules were very vague in some ways. And it meant that, like, the way players and the storyteller interpreted the rules could change the game a lot, and it was very possible. It was very possible for someone to abuse that. It was very possible for someone to basically say, you know what, the way these rules are set up, I can completely screw over everybody else. I can do things that are completely outside of the spirit of the unwritten rules that are supposed to be being followed, and there's nothing you can do about it. And
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know who would ever do something like that.
But Paul was a noted power gamer in high school.
I don't know what he's talking about, but
but the point being, not that I'm comparing you to Richard Spencer here.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate that.
But honestly, as crazy as this metaphor sounds, I feel like that's kind of how I feel now, because what I feel like is we currently live in a world where our political system is supposed to be governed by a lot of those unspoken rules. Like, you're just not supposed to do certain things. Like, you have free speech, but you're not supposed to cross certain lines of what is acceptable speech in public. And you're not supposed to do certain things. And there's an extent to which it feels like Nazis are standing up saying, you stupid liberals, you have all of these ideas about what is right and good, and so we're going to use those to protect ourselves while we do horrible, terrible things, and you can't stop us because you're liberals and you're snowflakes and all that kind of stuff. And there's an extent to which, in that regard, I think like that's why the punch means so much, because it is a way of kind of what you're saying, of making the Nazi bleed, of saying, you know what, these people are not untouchable. I really want us to be able to find more nonviolent ways of fighting back against them. But to some extent, like just that first punch is a way of being like, you know what, we're not helpless. It's not just about they're using the system against us and we can't stop it. Like there are ways to stop it. And punching them is one of them, and hopefully there's a lot of other good ones. But at least, like you said, we're seeing them bleed. We're seeing that it's possible.
Yeah, I think that's actually kind of a brilliant metaphor. Having also being a huge mage aficionado and about this power gaming thing, I don't know what you're talking about. I think really what it is creative usage of one's powers, which is my biggest pet peeve, by the way, when it comes to superhero fiction, is like, yep. Why aren't they using such and such power right now?
Right, like think outside the box.
Why are characters so bad at using their powers all the time? But that said, I do think, like, there's Mage is all about paradigm, right? Yep. It's like the idea is that humanity and mages, whatever, kind of collectively have established a paradigm that everybody operates within, and that kind of governs reality and what people are capable of doing. And while I don't believe that happens in reality in terms of the physical world of what's capable, that certainly happens within society. And so I think Mage is a great sort of metaphor for what happens in society, where people, collectively kind of think, well, this is what's possible, right? Or this is what's allowed. So people just do the things within what's allowed. And then that changes over time when somebody says, well, why can't I do this? And then they do it. And then either, they get locked up or burned at the stake or whatever, or people are like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. We can do that. Why can't we do that? Let's do that. And so, when you look at the U.S. government, like, there's a constitution. It was like, okay, here's what you can do. This is what the government's for. And over 240 whatever years, people have been like, well, how about this? And then sometimes they change the constitution. Sometimes they're just like, well, what they really meant was this other thing, right? But so, we are where we are now, and there's kind of a general idea of what's possible, what people can do, what people should do. But, there's obviously tension there. Well, no, we should do this. No, we should do that. Oh, you can't do this. You can't do that. But there are kind of some, all of that exists given like a certain set of assumptions most of the time, I think, about what people are going to do, what people's intentions are. And when you get a bunch of people who, I think the Republican Party in general are brilliant power gamers.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Really.
The whole thing with the Supreme Court was a complete, like, I'm going to abuse a loophole in the rules. That's exactly what it was.
It's like, well, what if we just don't do that thing that it says we're supposed to do, but it doesn't say what the penalty is for not doing it, so we can just not do it and see what happens.
Right.
And the Democrats are just like, oh, I guess I didn't do it. And it's like, okay. But so you have one party, pretty much slavishly following the rules and the procedure and being like, well, this is what it says, so we're just going to follow that. And assuming the other party is acting in good faith, which it's not. It's saying, okay, those are the rules binding you. So what we're going to do is we're going to see everything we can get away with within, there's like the rules on paper, and then there's the kind of unwritten rules.
Yep.
And it's like when you have one party kind of abiding by certain unwritten rules and the other one's not, but they're like, well, it's not really violating the written rules. And the other party's like, oh yeah, well, I guess, good point. Cheerio. I don't know why the Democrats are suddenly British, but then I want to make a quick point of clarification. I'm not trying to draw a connection directly between the entirety of the Republican Party and, specifically the neo-Nazi alt-right. Although I do think the neo-Nazi alt-right is certainly something that has, I don't know whether it's grown out of or grown into the Republican Party. But what they've done is they've taken their just vile, hateful philosophy, rhetoric, whatever, and they've inserted and kind of infected the entirety of the Republican Party, which doesn't mean every person, but it means they've kind of taken over. I mean, there's a neo-Nazi. It's the chief strategist in the White House.
Well,
it's absurd. I mean, these are crazy times.
And I think that's I think there's a couple of things you're saying there that are really important. One is that distinction you're drawing really matters. Like I think certainly we're not talking about punching everybody wearing a "Make America Great" hat. Although I kind of want to. But
I mean, but if I do, just. Yeah.
Sure, but I think it is important. What like the discussion we're talking about is wanting to punch the Nazi, I think the power gamer point is so essential because part of the issue is to continue this. I've gotten really into role playing and LARPing again recently, so I think it's a great metaphor that I'm thinking about a lot because part of the idea is when people power game in small ways. Every time they do it, it makes it easier for someone to power game, for that one person to come along and power game in a truly horrific way. And I think that's exactly what they're like. To me, I don't think all Republicans are Nazis, but I think the Republicans power gaming, like quite literally, makes the Nazis makes what is happening with the Nazis today absolutely possible in that same kind of way.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the Republican Party opened the door.
Yep.
And in swooped, those who swooped. And meanwhile, though, I hold the Democrats responsible as well for being like, oh, well, I guess that's happening.
Oh, yeah. Well, and here's this gets what is to me. I think I have two main reasons why I think I am pro-Nazi punching. Mm-hmm. Why I think Nazi punching is an ethically acceptable thing to do in this day and age. And one of which is tying directly into this idea, and it ties into something I think that is essential to so much superhero stuff, which is, and I wrote an article recently on the blog that was entitled, why we need to stop being Commissioner Gordon and start being Batman. And I think the two stories that I think about this most is Batman and it's V for Vendetta. But I think this comes up in so many superhero stories. I mean, certainly it's Cap in Civil War. It's the idea of like, if the government and the state and the police and all these things are functioning the way they are functioning, then vigilantism shouldn't happen. Like
the way they're supposed to function. I mean.
Yeah, like I personally,
not necessarily the way they're actually functioning right now.
Yeah, oh no, absolutely. I mean that's the point. But I start from an ethical perspective of I don't want to live in a world where any person who believes that someone else is doing something truly bad gets to punch them. Like I don't.
Right.
I think that's a generally bad thing, especially because there are people who could probably take the ethical concepts that I'm going to lay out and exactly apply them to explain why I should get punched. Because what I think,
absolutely,
and like I think that's the people who blow up abortion clinics. They have often very rational, thought-out perspectives why they think it's necessary, even though it starts from positions I find completely abhorrent. And so I want to be careful about that. But I think to me. What in every Batman story that I know of, and the Christopher Nolan ones are the ones I know best, but in all of them, there's a part in Bruce Wayne's early evolution where he turns to the justice system, hoping it's going to help him do what he thinks is needed against Joe Chill or against whoever killed his parents or whatever the thing he's looking at is. And it's when that breaks down and he realizes that it's not working that he starts to think, I have to become Batman. And I think that, to me, that's, and same with V for Vendetta, an essential, and we've talked about this in the podcast before, an essential part of V's idea is like, look, he wants to live in a world where he would be locked up for good reason. He shouldn't be doing what he's doing. But, the people who locked him away in that prison and did those terrible experiments to him, they should just be arrested and tried and go to prison.
Yeah.
But they're not. And that's
because they run the government.
Right. And that's the thing, is I think that's frankly, a couple of years ago, not that the world was great by any means, but when Obama was president and there was at least a little more sanity in our government, I probably would have a different perspective on this. But in a day when, like, Steve Bannon is the chief of staff, or not chief of staff, but senior advisor, and like
chief strategist or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like when Donald Trump, one of the things he did was to take alt-right. He like there were a number of white power groups on the terrorism watch list.
Yeah.
He took them off the watch list. Like, I think
there were a number of terrorist groups that happened to be white, and so they took them off the watch list. So it's like,
Right.
yeah, you can go and do your terror, and it's not. I mean, personally, I have my own feelings about terrorism and calling things terrorism, and
Yeah, I mean,
having.
it,
But once you're going to use that paradigm and create lists like that, those groups should absolutely be on those lists.
absolutely. Like I agree with you. That whole system is problematic. But certainly what he's doing is giving a big green light. He's basically saying to the extreme power gamers, go ahead. And to me, in that world, when I'm like, you know what? I can't count on someone to legally do something against this guy. So maybe it is time for the, even just saying these words to me is weird because it's so against what I generally think. But I do, like, there is a degree to which, like, yeah, maybe it is just time for some vigilante acts.
Yeah, I mean, it's time to grab your cape and cowl and, not necessarily literally go out there and physically do whatever. I mean, now I'm picturing this, and it's hilarious. But
I look great in a cape, I gotta say.
Yeah. I took my yearbook photo in a cape. I mean, it's a cloak.
Most of our listeners may not know this, but I'm partially disabled. I have a prosthetic leg, and I often use a cane, and so now I'm just envisioning hitting people with a cane from time to time. But no,
I like it.
Bad. Not going down that road.
No, but the point is like to quote a Megadeth, album title, the system has failed.
Yeah,
and it's a system that was failing, and I think there are points when a system is failing, and you say, okay, what can we do to rectify the situation and save the system and make it function the way it's supposed to function and achieve what it's supposed to achieve. And there's a point at which it's just like, well, we can't just say, okay, well, that's what the system says to do. So, I mean, sometimes there's not a fail safe, and sometimes you just have to scrap it and start over. And, that doesn't necessarily mean an actual entire revolution but it means at least a metaphorical one.
Yeah.
And it means that I think we've been shown that we can't follow all the rules that we necessarily like to follow, like in order to get the world to be where we want the world to be.
Right.
And it's sort of like sometimes you need to get your hands dirty, sometimes you need to get your hands bloody.
Yeah. And I think that's to me that is the idea of, because I think part of what for me it's about is we're trying to get back to a world where it's not necessary anymore. I don't want long term. I think I know this is one of the most contentious parts of the whole Christopher Nolan Batman stories, but I like the idea that on some level Batman doesn't want to be needed. He wants Harvey Dent to be able to be so good at fighting crime within the system that Gotham no longer needs Batman. But that's
wants a functioning police department. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Or how about just a lock on the door at Arkham? Like just that basic thing.
That would be an improvement. Yeah, they should look into that.
Yeah. Well, and so for me, there's two key points I think about why I'm okay with the Nazi punch. One is this idea of the system has, like you said, the Megadeth thing. The system is broken, and so we need a different system, even if it's not the official one, dangerous as that is. But the other thing is, and you were talking about this before, the act of self-defense. Because I think one of the things I think, and we can go back and forth on the definition of the word violence itself, and that's a whole other issue, but
sure.
I think there is this concept that physically hitting someone is categorically different than anything you can ever do with words.
Right.
And there is an extent to which I believe that. But there's an also extent to which I sort of think if one person is punching me and someone else is standing up and saying to a group of people who all listen to him, hey, all go punch Matthew, I feel just as
I'll give you $100 a piece. Or
even just, hey, all your problems are Matthew's fault. Go punch him.
Right.
I feel like I am in just as much, if not more danger by that person standing up and saying that. And
particularly if they're a charismatic, persuasive person in a position of power.
Sure. And so to me, if someone punches me, I get to punch them back. I think that is a fairly well accepted idea. And to me, I think it isn't a logical stretch to say by that same definition, and in the same way also, if someone's punching my friend, I get to punch them to defend my friend. So if someone now stands up and says, I want you to punch someone else, for me, this is where it becomes okay to say, okay, I'm going to punch you then to get you to stop saying that. Because just by saying that in a charismatic way, and when we know that you have people who are going to listen to you, that is an attack. And I think we get to defend ourselves against attacks.
Yeah, well, I mean, you look at the most recent terrorist shooting that I'm aware of, in the one in Canada, right, in Quebec.
Uh-huh.
That's, a guy goes into a mosque and kills 6 or more people. It's got, very little press relative to a lot of, the other shootings. But that's, that was an act of white supremacist terror or Islamophobic terror. Or I don't know exactly what the motives were, and I generally my personal feeling is kind of that the best response to terrorism is to ignore it. Not in a law enforcement capacity, but in a personal capacity.
Right. Don't give it the press attention, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and also just from a emotional standpoint, it's if I hear about any number of people being killed, I'm always going to feel sadness.
Right.
And I'm always going to have sympathy and empathy for their, sadness for the fact that they didn't get to do whatever else they could have done in life, and empathy for their family members and friends and, who've lost people they care about. But at the same time, the number of people who die every day is staggering.
Yeah.
The number of murders every day. I think there's 1,000 murders a day in the world, roughly, right? So statistically, I think focusing so much on very particular acts is I just find it irrational and unconstructive.
Well, and especially
and it leads to things like where we are now. But
and I mean that is exactly, we're getting off on a tangent here, but I just want to agree with this, that is exactly the goal. It is called terrorism because the point isn't, nobody thinks no one thinks they're going to kill all the people they don't like, but they think that they're going to instill terror. And it's killing the people isn't the goal, terrorizing the other people is, and it's they killed some people, they're happy about that, I guess. Right.
They're dead, but
anyway, so
it's the terrorists won.
Right.
When a Muslim ban gets passed and whatever, that's good game. You know?
That's exactly what they wanted. But anyway, so go back to your original point. Where were you going with that?
Right. So the main point though was that that person or people like that person are influenced by people like Donald Trump. They're influenced by people like Steve Bannon and Breitbart News, and by Richard Spencer or Milo, whatever his name is. And so the people who have encouraged people to hate other people, and sometimes have encouraged violence directly, if somebody's protesting at my event, you should punch them,
Yeah.
Those people are responsible. Those people are responsible to some extent for those acts. And so if at the end of the day you want to say, oh, well, if someone listens to your podcast and they punch a Nazi in the face, you're partially responsible for that, fine.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I'll take some responsibility there.
And you're welcome. But, no, but it's there are, it's like a mob boss, right?
Mm-hmm.
The mob bosses, they almost never went to jail.
Right.
Because they didn't shoot people, right? They weren't the ones putting, grenades in people's cars or whatever. They were just saying a few words to someone who might go and shoot someone else, And that doesn't make them not responsible for, they were just talking, We were just having a philosophical conversation about what maybe would happen if this person weren't around anymore, No, they're responsible for that. And, so it's not that the act of speech is, or should be illegal.
Right.
To me, although anyway, it's that when you are specifically advocating violence and hate and all that, it's like you're a cause of what then happens.
Yeah.
You know.
No, I think that's the key point. You know, I think that's the when we're talking about the Nazi punching, like, and here's I think the other an essential part of this is that, like, the power and the influence that is being had is an essential part of this. You know, we're not talking about punch any random person who says random things. You know, if some person just stands up in the corner and says, you know, punch all the red-haired people, I have red hair. I don't think that I have a right to punch that guy because I don't feel there's any actual reasonable belief that I have to think someone is going to listen to that guy and come over and punch me.
Right.
But, you know, and then frankly, like, I would love to believe that our podcast has enough influence that we're going to inspire a wave of Nazi punching.
Right. Yeah.
I'm going to be honest. I don't
it's
think
unlikely that 100 or so listeners are going to.
But hey, well, again, I keep asking people to show us ways that you are listening to this podcast or having an influence. Please don't go punching people as a way to do that, but, like, tweet at us, show us you care.
Yeah.
But I think that's another essential part of this is, I mean, the Nazis are not a crazy ideology. They are you know, it is a group that has, like, the last time this group was in power, murdered millions of people. Started a global war, like, and that
caused the deaths of like 50-some million people or something.
That's a high number. I mean, Stalin got his licks in too. But
right. He can get some credit for the
And you know, we firebombed some cities and nuked some cities. I mean, there was some badness to go all around. But yes, no, Nazis.
Yeah. It's not like there definitely wouldn't have been war and murder if all that hadn't happened. But we can certainly pin the mass murder of at least 11 million people directly.
Exactly. And certainly, I think there's a really important point to be made about, you know, that power is a big part of what we're talking about here. That there is good reason to believe that when someone like Richard Spencer, you know, especially because we are seeing acts of violence. We are seeing, you know, kids getting beaten up in schools and being bullied. We are seeing swastika.
We're seeing swastikas on the subway in fucking New York City.
Yeah, and on synagogues and on Jewish graveyards and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean. So yeah, I think all of that is part of this idea of there is like legit, you know, there's that phrase that gets used a lot about a clear and present danger. You know, I think if someone says, you know, a Nazi gets up and gives a speech, like, there's a clear and present danger that people are going to listen to that speech and do acts of violence. And if I would like the government to be able to say, no, you're inciting violence, we're going to arrest you for giving that speech. But they're not doing that, so punch a guy.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of doing that, they're saying, "Nah, we're going to take you off the watch list, or the terror, you know, whatever it is."
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let me get into some of the that kind of gets into a question I want to talk about, which is about what the Nazis doing. But I want to start just by saying, who is a Nazi? What are we defining as a Nazi when we talk about is it okay to punch a Nazi?
Yeah, I mean, when you kind of posted this question on Facebook about the punching Nazis, that was I thought that was an important, you know, sort of distinction where somebody responded with like just a dictionary definition. I'm like, well, that wasn't really what it's getting at, but okay, thanks. But it does, you know, there's uppercase, lowercase, you know. I mean, there's a Nazi soldier, you know, there's a Nazi officer in, you know, literally the Third Reich or whatever. But then, you know, then there's, you can say, well, somebody who just holds beliefs that are sympathetic to, you know, Nazism, basically. And by Nazism, I mean, we're basically talking about white supremacist fascism, right? I mean, that's...
Well, I mean, I think that's actually...
Well, that's another question, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
I think this is an important place.
Is that what we're talking about?
You made a reference to the big N, little n, and that's something I've said before.
Yeah.
Like, I think, to me, there's a couple of ways we can use that term. One, like, the most, like, narrow definition can be, you know, there was the specific political entity known as the Nazi Party in Germany. And there are officially labeled Nazi organizations in America today.
Right.
And so,
which, just very briefly, which are actually illegal in Germany.
Right. And,
which I think is, okay, I won't go on that tangent.
Well, yeah, yeah, I don't know if I want them to be illegal, but that's another story. Like, I think that yeah,
Right. Well,
let's stay away from that
okay.
tangent. I
Yeah,
think we're
we'll
good.
stay away from that. That's a whole interesting topic, though, where it's like the only, pretty much one of the only times that I think, well, I understand why this actual speech and expression is illegal in this specific country.
Yep. Yeah. I don't,
You know,
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I think in Germany.
like maybe give it 100 years.
Right.
And then be like, okay, now you're allowed to own Mein Kampf.
Yeah.
But if we see you starting anything, we got our eyes on you.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I think that in Germany, especially, I've got no problem with that. But okay. So like, if the most extreme is like the person who is a registered member of a Nazi organization in the United States,
Right.
and then
right.
a little
Which
less,
you can be, and there are people.
and then a little bit less extreme is someone who is today like directly espousing like that Hitler should have won the war, that the Nazis were right, that we need other specific things. And then you can get broader and broader and broader to the people who are today practicing like fascism and white supremacy and anti-Semitism, but are not necessarily specifically like Hitler was good or the Nazis themselves were good, but they have an ideology that is very similar. And we can get even more broad and say like the entire alt-right, all of which has like a lot of Nazi-like ideas. But I do think, and so I was saying, for you, when you say it's okay to punch a Nazi, where on that continuum are we talking?
Well, I mean, as far as like actual party affiliation, I don't really care.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think that's the salient point at all. I think. I think it comes down to actions versus beliefs.
Yeah.
You know, and to me, it's like, I saw something where someone was saying, so you think it's okay to punch someone just for their beliefs, you know, in response to this whole Nazi punching thing. It's like, no, I don't think it's okay to punch someone because of their beliefs. I think people can believe whatever they want. In fact, I think that the vast majority of the world believes absolutely absurd things. Mm-hmm. I don't go around telling people that all the time because I wouldn't have a lot of friends. And also because I don't think believing absurd things necessarily makes someone a bad person.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think it's necessarily that consequential. It can be very consequential when believing such and such things leads someone to do something or to try to control the way other people act or what other people believe. And then that's where I'm like, okay, now we need to talk about this.
Yeah.
And so, you know, when it comes to being whether someone's registered, I mean, if somebody's not even affiliated at all with even the alt-right, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they're going around espousing the same beliefs, right? But they're just not necessarily that much in contact with like the organizations or whatever. But you know, they're writing articles about, or they're talking to their friends or whatever. Or, you know, they have a small group of frat buddies or whatever who, you know, like to go around hitting Mexicans with baseball bats because they're, you know, racist, right? Or whatever. Like that to me, I'd rather punch that guy, right? Who's spouting those ideas and having some direct consequence, or saying those things to people who are listening.
Yeah.
Right? Than somebody who's a registered member of the Nazi Party and maybe even, you know, owns like all of Hitler's books and like has like a Nazi flag in their bedroom, but they wake up in the morning, they go out to work, and they never talk about it to anybody. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
first of all, I wouldn't necessarily know about them that they were this. But let's say I did. Let's say I found out. Let's say I like saw a Nazi flag in the bed. I'd be like that.
Well, I mean, I can even give you a better example because this is one I was thinking about, and I'm with you. I think the action is more important. And like one of the things I was thinking about is, let's say, you know, the people at Anonymous. So I think a lot of this sort of internet stuff they're doing, like hacking, is awesome. But if they were tomorrow to like publish a list of the names and home addresses of people who were registered members of a Nazi organization, and therefore people wanted to start like online attack, like that actual action, I'm not sure what I'm standing on, and the online attacks on them, I'm not sure where I stand on. But if someone were to then like take that name and address list and just go to the houses of all those people and start punching them, That's what I'm like, no, that's not okay. Like, that's not
right.
what we're talking about is not attacking people for their beliefs. We're talking about attacking people for their actions.
Yeah, and that would be an example of something that would give me intellectual or emotional pleasure that I would be against.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I admit, it sounds kind of awesome, but I'd also be
like,
literally
giggling,
no.
thinking like punching a lot of Nazis, like checking a list and bad Santa or whatever. Like, you've been naughty. But
there's a great scene.
But like, yeah, I don't think that's a good thing. I don't think that's constructive.
I mean, in a way, the frame I was thinking about it, and I'm going to do horrible abuse to the English language here for a minute. But
just for a minute.
Well, yeah, okay, I do it often. But I kind of think the issue is, like, are you Naziing as a verb instead of as a noun?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
Like,
no. You can verb nouns all the time. Go for it.
Yeah, like, I think, like, I don't care if you are a Nazi. I care if you are Nazi.
Yeah.
You know, like
Totally.
I care if you are in the and that's like Richard Spencer, when he was punched, he wasn't like going to buy milk for his kids. He was in the process of giving a speech espousing racial violence and espousing anti-Semitic violence.
Yeah.
And that's
punch that guy in the face.
Yeah, like, and I'll even take an example.
When he's doing that.
I'll even
Not when he's like playing basketball with his kids or something.
I'll even take an example where I say, like, this is where maybe, like, you're right, it isn't just about Nazis. It's about, like, all the things we're talking about, you know.
Yeah.
The people who stand up and give, like, you know, all gays are going to go to hell and should be, like, you know, violence against them is a good thing. Like, there's an amazing amount of gay bashing violence that happens in our world today.
Yeah.
Punch that guy. You know, like, the person who's standing up and saying, like, you know, abortion clinics are houses of murder and they should be destroyed and, like, all the lone wolf stuff. Like, in our lifetime, like, you know, I still remember being at the funeral of abortion doctors who were murdered, you know. Dr. Tiller, not that many years ago. Like, to me, that's the issue. And, like, I'm not by any means saying that the people who are, you know, in favor of bombing abortion clinics are Nazis. I don't think that's an accurate statement. But they absolutely are advocating violence against people to support their beliefs, you know. And I think that's... To me, therefore, I think it is fair to say an act of self-defense. If the system isn't going to stop this, then someone has to.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I think that's I mean, they would probably argue that they're trying to stop an act of violence and against the, you know, fetus or whatever. But, but like I do think it does really come down to, you know, the fact that there is violence being done already,
right?
You know, and not ignoring that and not like pretending like that's not happening. You know, and not pretending like the people that you're punching or that we're saying like, you know, yeah, we can get behind that. That those aren't people responsible for that violence, and not just, and it's to me, it's not retributive, you know, retributive,
retributive, yeah.
Yeah, it's not retribution. It's not vengeance. It's not like, oh, you said these words, and then someone else went and did this thing, and so now I'm going to punch you in the face.
Right.
Like, that might be, like, what's literally the sequence of events, but it's also, if somebody said whatever horrible things, and then somebody went and did whatever horrible act, right? And then the person who originally said the horrible things was like, oh, shit, like, yes, I said all these things, but I really honestly didn't think it would lead to these actions. I feel horrible. I'm, you know, I'm recanting what I said before, and now I'm going to advocate for, like, cool. Okay, now you're on our team, you know.
And
like
there are people doing that. There are people who are like,
of course,
giving power, like, you know, former skinheads are like going to skinheads and being like, look, don't do that. And they have more power to affect that. Yeah, I don't want to go punch that guy.
Absolutely,
like,
no, those are the greatest allies oftentimes, you know. I mean, the people who I think we can't wait around for, like, moderate Republicans or people who kind of like embrace soft nationalism or whatever the fuck that is. I heard that used by somebody who I consider to be an extreme nationalist now. But like, we can't wait for those people to get stuff done. You know, the same way like when you and I and Logan were talking about like who should lead a movement or whatever. Like the way, I was like, well, billionaires would be ideal to get such and such. And he's like, but, fuck billionaires. And I was like, which is like, I think a big part of what he was trying to express here, though, was like, we can't wait around for like the people who are largely in charge of our oppression or of whoever's oppression to like change their minds and like, and then like fix everything. But what is true, I think, is that when people who were part of the problem, or even a major part of the problem, do change their minds and come around on things, I think they can be some of the strongest advocates and
absolutely,
and the strongest agents of change. Like Glenn Beck, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, what he's doing is. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think he was very much a part of that extreme conservative movement that helped lead to where we are now. And I mean, I don't know everything about his current positions, but I do see, I mean, for what I've seen, there is remorse there for like, this isn't what I meant, and like, and some understanding of like, having kind of been a part of that and trying to then, like, that's a voice that the people who are still in that are more likely to listen to.
Yeah, and I think that's essential. And I think, and to me, part of what I think that Glenn Beck is saying that I think is so powerful and that ties back into where we started from is, like, he's recognizing that he had influence that he didn't realize he had, and that,
right.
like, because that part of it is that, like, I think that. And here's where we start talking about like the power gamers versus the Nazis. Like I don't ever think it would have been okay to punch Glenn Beck, like no matter how bad he was doing.
Right.
But I think it is important for Glenn Beck to realize that he helped to create the environment of the people who we now want to punch. Because I think the extent to which part of what Glenn Beck was saying was, I want you to hate these people. These people are terrible and they are destroying America. And by the way, don't hurt them physically, but still I want you to hate them. And he didn't realize that you can't walk that line that finely, that some people are going to hear that and say, okay, let's go punch them then. Let's go hurt them. So I think that...
And he might have been doing it largely for ratings,
Yeah,
I mean,
and that's...
I don't know, and I think a lot of people did and still do is the thing,
Mm-hmm. The extreme there. I also want to... we're getting a little lost here in the tangent because it's a great tangent, but I want to pull back with, another reference that you and I... Go to
Actually, can I just wrap this up with that bit, which is that the point isn't retribution. It's not vengeance. It's you said something, someone did something, you're still saying that thing, people are going to do more things.
Yes.
So it's to me, the goal is to prevent or reduce the future things that people are doing because of the things that are still being said.
Right. And here's where I think I actually, and that's exactly the point I wanted to talk about, because I'm going to tie this into probably my favorite of the, not superhero necessarily, but sci-fi and fantasy and all this kind of stuff, which is Star Wars, which is so much of my ideas of what is and is not acceptable violence comes from Yoda, quite frankly, and like his ideas of the Force. And I think, and this kind of goes to what we were saying at the very beginning of like, punching a Nazi right now feels really good. And that's, to me, like the Star Wars idea is that's the road to the dark side. Like once you start, because once you start down the road of like causing physical harm to people I don't like, or even people who I think are bad, hating bad people makes you someone who is acting out of hate. And what Star Wars to me is all about is the idea of how destructive that idea is, especially because you realize, like, to some extent, that's the problem on the other side. Like I always want us to remember, like, on some level, like the people who are the most hate-filled, it's because they think that the people they hate are hurting the people they love. And so on some level,
it's true.
Like Nazis are acting out because they want to defend the people they love. And they think the people they love are in danger because of the people they hate. And that I'm not in any way, shape, or form justifying a single moment of it, but I'm saying it's important to remember that, not because it makes them okay, but it's how we remember that we don't become in any way, shape, or form like that, and that to me, this actually goes back to the podcast we did on vengeance in the movie Desperado a long time ago, which I'll post a link to because I think it was one of our best podcasts, and we talk about the same question. Like, I'm going to acknowledge punching a Nazi would feel good, and watching someone punch a Nazi, and watching Antonio Banderas in Desperado, bloodily shoot all of these terrible drug dealers in all these terrible ways, it's hilarious and it feels great. But
Yeah.
but that can't, when at the end of the day, that can't be the reason we're doing it.
No, it can't.
I think more than anything, like I feel like right now I'm really scared about the fact that I feel constantly under attack and I feel constantly afraid of what our government's doing. And there's something really tempting about wanting to be able to fight back with violence. And I think that's not necessarily a bad thing, but at the end of the day, that can't be what justifies the attack. The justification for it has to be that it's self-defense, that this needs to be stopped because there's a real harm that's being caused.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And also, I think there's always the consideration, like, what are you going to accomplish?
Right.
And when acting solely out of emotion, with a lack of reason, with a complete lack of reason, I think you're not that likely to achieve what you'd like.
Yeah. No, it's very true.
And there was some quote somewhere about about rage and how, like, you don't use rage to overthrow the system or oppression or whatever. Use polite discourse and yada yada yada. And I think a lot of times some of the things you need to do can be fueled by rage, but it can't be blinding rage. That's like really the key is like, feel the anger, but then actually let your brain tell you what to do,
And I also want to be clear here that I'm talking about why I'm trying to figure out what I think is acceptable for myself and for people who I can kind of relate to. I think as a philosophical concept, I do hold to the idea that there is real danger in, like you said, in sort of losing yourself to rage. But I also, for me, the flip side of that is I am incredibly careful. I'm incredibly nervous about the idea of starting to judge people who are angry because they're experiencing things that I've never experienced. And this is like, this came up especially a lot in Ferguson, that town in outside of St. Louis, where there was rioting and violence after the cop who'd killed a young black man was set free. And I, even just saying those words, I mean, there was far more nonviolent protest than there was any, like, the rioting and violence was a very small part, but there was some looting and things like that.
Yeah.
And
I would like to reclassify the rioting as violent protest.
Yeah, actually, that's a far better word, and I think that, like I said, I was but let me just get to the point, which is that I think, like, do I think that is the, like, as a political strategist, if someone asked me, like, do you think that's the best strategy? On some level, probably not. But I also think my opinion on if that's the right strategy is pretty close to meaningless, because I'm not a person who's dealing with the fear of police that they are in that same way, and even more so, like, I don't know how much of that rage has built up. I don't feel that rage, and I don't feel like it is my place to say. So I just want to be very clear. I think that there's an importance of recognizing the danger of letting things just become too emotional and just acting out of rage. But I also don't think it's my place to judge someone else as they find that line for themselves, especially if they're feeling rage about a situation that I don't experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. I also think it's important to, like, say when, I think there's a difference between saying, well, that's not effective, and saying, like, you definitely shouldn't do that.
Right.
Like, watching sports isn't effective. Like, it's, it doesn't, but I mean, but like, that doesn't mean people shouldn't do it. Although I don't know. I think I'm boycotting all the pro sports leagues right now, but the thing is that it's like, I do think that it's possible to have both conversations, but it's very difficult, and it's very difficult to get people to listen to both things at once. Like, I do think that a lot of the violent protests, in whether it's in Ferguson or Baltimore or Berkeley, over the past few years, I think on some level they don't accomplish very much in terms of changing things to be, making things more favorable to the people who are doing the protests.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a separate issue from like whether or not it's okay. Like, yeah, if you live in a place where cops are going around shooting you and getting away with it, and also just telling you, oh, you shouldn't be in this neighborhood, you have to stay there, and your entire world is economically oppressive, and, maybe you don't have clean drinking water, or, like, I don't care if you go flip over some cop cars, or, I mean, when you start physically harming other people or killing people, then yeah, I have a problem with it. But when it's just property destruction, like, I don't give a shit about that, Well, like, I don't think it necessarily accomplishes an end, like, politically or whatever, but I certainly am, I'm not going to, I mean, I don't really care about property anyway.
Well, and I hear what you're saying. I would actually disagree. I do think that they're in the same way that you talked about, like, punching the Nazi does accomplish something. Yeah. It makes them bleed, and there is an extent to which I think, like, sometimes the violent protest does exactly that same thing. Even if nothing else, that there was that class I talked about. One of the things that we really delved into is the idea of, like, to some extent, like, I'm a white guy talking about the history of the civil rights movement. Like, this is a very cursory, general level knowledge that I'm sharing. But my understanding, and I've seen a lot of great research on this, is that there's an extent to which, part of what makes Martin Luther King effective is the fact that Malcolm X was scaring the shit out of people. And then there's an extent to which, like, knowing that the violence is possible makes people start to think, like, maybe we need to actually find a nonviolent way to settle, to listen to shit.
Sure.
Well, and again, I think that's a whole.
Well,
go ahead. I don't want to get us too far into that tangent, but I want to say I kind of disagree
with you
on that.
that I'm not necessarily saying that I don't think it can be effective.
Right.
I'm just saying that in those particular situations, I'm not convinced that it was, or that in any given situation, it might not be effective. But that doesn't mean I'm going to condemn people for it.
Right.
That I 100% agree that it can be effective.
Okay.
No doubt.
Yeah, they're on the same page. Because certainly I think that what I hear you saying more than anything is that, like, whether or not you and I think any particular event is effective, it's not whether it's effective isn't. That can be a legitimate question to ask, but that's not the reason to judge it. Like, on some level, like, if the that whether it's right or wrong and whether it's effective or not are not the same question.
Yeah, I'm saying you can judge the effectiveness of something, and you can judge, like, is this okay or whatever. I consider those two often related but separate questions.
To be sure. Well, and I also think that it gets to. And this is an issue I think that comes up a lot and that really has to be talked about is immediate versus long-term strategies and the concept of harm reduction. Like, harm reduction, and we can do a whole long discussion of that, but, like, it's sort of a philosophy that talks about the idea of, like, if you're in a bad situation, yes, it's good to try and change the situation itself at its root, but that there is an element of, like, doing small things in the moment that you might think of as bad in the long term, but that reduce harm in the immediate sense, like, that there's real value to that. And here, like, I think this is where we're talking about, like, I want us to move towards a world where Richard Spencer isn't giving speeches. And I don't know if punching Richard Spencer in that moment moves us towards that world. I think it does.
Right.
But I agree with you that there's a debate. But even if
it might not, but yeah.
But I think
it might.
But I think the point is that if in this moment Richard Spencer in this moment is going to put one life in danger of someone hearing in this moment and going out and doing violence, then punching him in this moment has a lot of value, whether or not it helps that longer term strategy. Right.
Sure.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, there's always a question of short term versus long term, immediate versus more hypothetical. And by no means can we expect everybody who objects to a particular thing or the status quo to want to protest against it or take whatever actions, always just thinking of like, well, let's just think 20 years down the line.
Right.
Like, yeah, I know, you know, your friends or kids might get killed or whatever because of such and such. But let's think about what we want 50 years down the line, or even 5 years, you know. I do think there's merit to thinking, what do we want 4 years down the line? But, you know, but we don't necessarily have that luxury, and some people have less and less of that luxury of thinking that far down the line.
Yeah, I think that's one of the especially key dangers is when a person who isn't really in danger in the moment is telling someone who is in danger in the moment that they have to think long term. I have some real problems there. Yeah,
exactly. Absolutely. I totally agree.
So
I would say that literally everyone on the planet is in danger in the like medium term.
Absolutely.
And that's a kind of a totally separate but really related issue.
Mm-hmm. No, to be sure.
You know, is it, which we'll address in our next episode, is it okay to punch a fossil fuel CEO in the face?
Exactly. I mean, hell, you want to tell me, you know, punch a gun company CEO?
Right. Yeah.
Although actually,
we'll be compiling a list of who it's okay to punch, and where you can punch them.
Although, as I say that, I realize just from an act of personal, like, self-protection.
Yeah. Don't punch gun people.
Maybe punching gun people is the wrong way to go. Good safety tip. Not well, and
pro tip.
And I will admit, I on the one flip side of that is a real concern that I have is
absolutely.
If people start punching Nazis, does that mean that the entire alt-right, and to some extent the entire right, says, you know what, we all need to carry weapons because we're all, you know, and so it's a whole other issue.
That's a very, very legitimate concern.
Yeah, and so that's another thing, and I don't have an answer to that, and I don't think that's again, I don't think that makes it wrong, but I think that's something else we got to be looking at is how this plays out.
Yeah, and I mean to really kind of take it to the apocalyptic level, like looking at the United States right now, like I feel like the United States is currently in the midst of as of yet mostly nonviolent civil war. That like hasn't quite really reached fruition yet, but it's like I think that's what's happening. And if that were to become violent, like even if you just remove the concern of the military and the fact that it's completely controlled by the right wing, sort of, I mean, at least officially.
Right.
Like, I don't think the left can win a war against the right in terms of interpersonal violence confrontation. Like, that's not a good matchup.
Oh, yeah, I mean, certainly, if we get into a world where ultra-liberals are willing to punch ultra-conservatives, and ultra-conservatives are going to punch ultra-liberals, we lose. Because there's a lot more of them willing to punch us than us willing to punch them.
And also just, like, if you look at gun ownership.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, at some point, people stop throwing punches and they start shooting each other.
Right. And that's, I think, something to be... It's something to be... And more than anything, though, to me, what that gets to is how desperately we need Commissioner Gordon to be stronger again, you know? Because, like, that's the whole problem, is, like... And this is why
there's a few judges. Well,
yeah, that one judge, a former attorney general who did some great things. But
there's two judges, right? Wasn't there in New York and there's Seattle and there's...
Yep. But I think that's it's the other key point of all this, is that we're talking about desperate measures in a time of a broken system, but that this can't be the long... Like, I don't want to say... You know, we're writing into the Constitution that every American has the constitutional right to punch a Nazi. Like that, because... Right. You're right, because
let's not do that.
Yeah, I do think that we are in... 25 years ago, the Republicans declared a culture war. And they're fighting that war, and I think we're just starting to realize that they meant that, and we're fighting back, and that there's some goodness there. But we don't win this war by punching more than they do. We win by getting us back to a system where... people like Richard Spencer are being arrested or at least, charged with inciting violence, not punched.
And we're like, it's like, I don't know, because as much as like the Republican Party started a culture war, I know a fair number of Republicans. You know, for someone who grew up in New York and like has mostly had, you know, very liberal friends, and I think really a minority of those Republicans, and yes, this may be because my sample size is skewed by being from the East Coast, yada, yada, yada. But, like, I think a minority are really socially conservative.
Right.
You know, I think most are the kind of fiscally conservative, socially liberal, like, creature that people, like, dispute whether or not really exists, which I think does, but is, you know, there's plenty to be said there on that topic, which we don't have to go down that rabbit hole. But the point being that I think if you look at if you even just look at the 62, 3, whatever million people who voted for Donald Trump, I think it's a minority of them who are on board with like a really small minority who are on board with the worst of all of that.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think really the key to winning is it's not necessarily to try and convince those people to vote differently. But it's like, one, I mean, there's a huge number of people who don't vote or who aren't very politically engaged, who are right now, a lot of whom are much more politically engaged than in the past. But also to kind of, like, I don't know, I mean, we've been talking a long time about how the Republican Party was possibly going to die out or split in two or this or that or whatever, and it got hijacked,
right?
You know, and I have to say, I did not see this coming. You know, I thought the Republican Party was going to become the Libertarian Party.
Yeah.
You know, I thought that there would be a socially conservative party, and then there would be a fiscally conservative but socially liberal party. And the trouble is that the way, you know, the U.S. Constitution is set up, you know, a multi-party system doesn't really function very well. But I don't know, I feel like there are so many libertarians who really, you know, they don't want to sign on to the entire left-wing package.
Right. Well,
they don't. Yeah.
We're kind of getting pretty deep. I absolutely hear where you're going, but we're kind of getting really deep onto a tangent here about like general politics. But I definitely hear the overall thought is that on some level, like, the political situation is a lot more complicated than just, you know, the good guys and the Nazis, but it's not.
Yeah.
But and anything we're talking about is happening in that larger picture.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I guess I did have a point that I was getting away from, and
okay,
thank you for pulling me back to that long distance, whatever. But the point was that I think the vast majority of people don't really want. Like, there are a lot of people who are like, well, yeah, okay, America first. Why not? You know,
right.
Like, yeah, like, you know, let's not have a bunch of immigrants. Let's not have a bunch of terrorism. But they're like, whoa, don't burn mosques and synagogues, you know?
Yeah.
Like, don't put swastikas places. What are you doing? And so, I mean, I think there's an extent to which, like, those people really need to, like, step up and be like, yeah, this isn't what we're doing. This isn't how we're going to do this, you know, thing of making things the way we want them to be. And I do think that, you know, kind of making Nazis front page news, like, even forget about the actual punching itself, but like, yeah, like, it's like outing them.
Well,
you know,
and I think yeah, that's where I thought you were going. I think that is and I think this is a great point to kind of close on, because we have gone for a while. But to me, like, I think one of the most dangerous things that's happening is, you're right, there is a moderate Republican who, it's not that I think they endorse the alt-right, it's that I think they're kind of allowing themselves to close their eyes to the alt-right and to say, you know what, it's not so bad. And punching Richard Spencer and talking about it puts it front and center. And it also sort of says to someone, look, because to me, the worst power gamer isn't the person who goes absolutely crazy and creates a, you know, Gould werecat mage. Not that I know that's the character Paul created. Yes, exactly.
Oh, no, Redmond, isn't it? Yeah. Anyway.
Okay. Anyway, the point being, like, that the problem isn't the crazy, crazy power gamer who is literally breaking the game. The problem is the moderate power gamer who refuses to acknowledge that what they are doing is making the other one possible. And that,
Right.
and that just how bad the game is getting. And I think to some extent, like, there are a lot of people who are thinking to themselves, look, Trump won. Isn't everything is going the way it should be? Why are you guys so upset? And to some extent, liberals saying, you know what, the liberals, the nonviolent ones, let everyone have their speeches won, are burning buildings in Berkeley and are punching people and are overturning cars. There is shock value of letting people realize just how bad things are. You know, and I don't mean to keep going back to it, but like this is, you know, the histories I've read of Malcolm X. One of the things that has been really documented is a lot of white people who thought of themselves as like, you know, fairly well-intentioned, non-racist white people were really shocked to realize that things were so like that people like Malcolm X and his the people who followed him believed that things were so bad. And that has value, and and I think he was right about how bad they were, but that there's a wake up value to that. And if punching Richard Spencer, if punching Nazis does that to some extent, then to me that's another positive.
Yeah, and I just to bring it back to a personal note, you're like maybe my most non-violent friend, like closest to like a true pacifist that I think. I mean, maybe I have other friends who are more that way or as much that way who don't talk about it.
Yeah.
But like having had the conversations we've had, you know, and about violence and even about self-defense. I mean, I know we've had conversations about self-defense where, you know, you've talked about the merits of not actually physically defending oneself.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that you're advocating that or anything, but
no, it's part of why, like, just to give a little context, it's part of why I refuse to, I would never, even if I lived in a very dangerous neighborhood, I wouldn't own a gun, because to me, I don't want to take another life. I would rather lose my life to some extent than take another life in self-defense. Not because I think self-defense is in any way not okay, but because I am that personally against violence. For the most part,
so
which I think is where you're going, but go ahead.
Yeah. For you to be saying, yes, this act of violence, I think, is a good idea. I think it accomplishes something. It's worthwhile, and it's okay. You know, to me, that's this huge statement about where we are, where we've come to. You know, and you know, I mean, I'm definitely on the other end of the spectrum of like, you know, in terms of self-defense. I mean, if somebody's like robbing me, I'll be like, yeah, here, have my money, you know, like, even if it puts me in a terrible financial situation, like, I'm not, you know, like, it's not a, you know, but like, if somebody's actually physically threatening me or someone else, like, I'm not going to hesitate to take whatever action, and I feel very strongly about that, but so like, for me to get around to the point of being like, yeah, punch a Nazi, you know, like, I don't think that doesn't take such a journey in terms of like where society is, you know, like that to me, like for me, that's kind of like a default, like, yeah, you know.
No, and I think it's a really good point. I admit I appreciate you acknowledging that, because for me, this has been really a real personal journey, because when I first heard of it, I had the knee-jerk reaction of course, that's wrong, because I am a nonviolent, you know, I am very much a Christian, and I think we can know all sorts of stuff about Christian ideology, about violence, and that's a whole other topic. But like, for the most part, I am very much like, you turn the other cheek, you use nonviolent methods. And it amazed me to realize like that I felt okay with this. And that was part of why I wanted to do this podcast, was I kind of wanted to really interrogate my own feelings and thoughts and hear your thoughts about this, because I am okay with it, but I think it has to really be discussed why, because it feels like it's flirting with something so dangerous, you know?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I kind of had the exact opposite, like, curve of, like, starting off like, yeah, punch a Nazi, and I was like, well, you know, I had a little bit of the, like, well, what does it accomplish? Like, not like it's not okay, but just, like, I do really have deep concerns that, like, someone's gonna punch a Nazi again and then they're gonna get shot by a gun-toting Nazi, you know? Or even a gun-toting, not really Nazi, but, like, someone who's kind of, like, a soft Nazi. I don't know. Someone who's listening at the rally. Which I heard Steve Bannon described as, and I'm like, no, that's a Nazi. That's not, you know.
Absolutely.
But
So we've been for a while, and I want to just kind of keep this podcast not going too crazy. But it is a topic we can go into so much depth on. Is there any other last things on this topic you want to really touch on?
no, I think that pretty much those are the it covers
Okay.
pretty much.
Well, because I do want to ask in closing, like I brought up, and I think you're in the same boat. Like one of the key ideas for us, like I said, my when I think of legitimate vigilantes, I think of Batman. And the Batman part is to me part of this. He uses violence. And we have a Batman coming up soon. How are you feeling about Lego Batman?
I'm going to watch it. I've been resisting getting the Lego Batcave.
Okay. That's fine.
Lego is the best toy
Yeah,
ever invented, by the way.
it really is. They are not sponsors of this podcast, just to be clear. We just love them.
Yeah. And the Danes also invented the best way of protesting against Nazis, I think, where they all wore the star or whatever,
Oh yeah, that's right.
including the king.
Right, like
Right,
if you want to round up Jews, we're all Jews. Yeah, that was
Right,
amazing.
yeah, exactly. I mean, you combine the best toy and the best superhero / unpowered vigilante. Who's
Yeah,
super rich.
it's
And then you add Will Arnett, who's just one of the funniest human beings. And I really don't see how you can go wrong. So
it's funny because I remember when we're now completely off our main topic. I just wanted to spend 5 minutes because I know I'm super excited for it.
But I brought in the Nazis.
Yeah, no, you
You
did.
know?
You connected.
Yeah.
Well, and it's because to me, like yes, we said something good about Zack Snyder, and he
Which
did.
I hope I never have occasion to say again in my life. But I brought in the Nazis. Like,
And I did. We talked. Zack Snyder has made some good movies. 300 is one of them. But I am on record. I think you are on record, if less virulently than I am, about how much we disliked Batman vs Superman. But that one part of it was that we both thought like that whatever we think of Affleck as an actor, like. My Batman does not get outsmarted by Lex Luthor. Like that's just not who Batman is.
yeah.
And frankly, like I kind of feel like the Lego Batman, as ridiculous and parody as it's going to be, might be a better Batman. So I'm super excited for that. I think that's going to be fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's like the fact that it's in Lego instead of live action, like, gives them license to really do what I think Schumacher wanted to do with Batman.
This is true.
But then, like, squared, just like take it.
How do you make Lego?
Right.
How do you make Lego nipples? I'm not sure that's possible.
I mean, yeah. Will there be a bat Lego with nipples and a bat Lego without nipples? And I don't know. I haven't looked closely.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I don't know if we're gonna get a podcast out of it, but that'll be something fun to look forward to. So,
Indeed.
thank you everyone for listening. Paul, is there anything you want folks to check out that you're doing these days?
No, but if you find a small brown dog in Las Vegas, get in touch with me.
I mean,
I've got to go find this dog.
I'm now worried that hundreds of people are going to find hundreds of small brown dogs and let you know. But hey, it means they're
reminds me of that John Oliver Is This Your Cat?
Yes. Anyway, for everyone who listened,
please tweet pics like that at me, and it'll make my day.
For everyone who listened, I really hope you enjoyed this, and I really hope you got something out of it.
At Zen Madman.
I do, yeah. Tweet at him at Zen Madman. You can tweet at me tweet at both of us at Superhero Ethics. You can go to Facebook, Superhero Ethics. Please like us on Facebook. Please follow us on Twitter. But also, please, mostly just talk to us about these things. As I said, I want this to be a way for folks to really think about the ethics of punching Nazis. Please don't go out and start punching every Trump voter you can find. Like, this is not about trying to incite and encourage the violence.
No.
This is about saying, like, I want us to be thinking about these things and thinking about why they're okay and why they're not okay. And Paul and I don't have the definitive answers on this. I would love to hear from you guys. I know I have friends who are, just as liberal and just as anti-Nazi as I am and think punching is still wrong. I want to hear from you. I'm sure I've got people who think that they should punch a lot more than Paul and I are talking about. I'd love to hear from you too. We'd love to hear from you too. So comment on the blog, comment on Facebook, tweet at us. We'd love to be part of that conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be back soon. Bye-bye.